Well, greetings, everyone. This is Dean Woodbeck from InCommon and Internet 2. Thanks for joining us today for this special edition of IAM Online to talk about campus cyber infrastructure plans. IAM Online is brought to you by InCommon, Internet 2, and the EDUCAUSE Higher Education Information Security Council. We're taking questions again via the chat function on Adobe Connect, and you can see there too if you have an audio problem, there is a phone bridge backup. And without further ado, I'll introduce our first speaker today, Ann West from Internet 2. Ann?
Thanks, Dean. Hi, I've got two speakers with us today that will be touching a bit on the campus side of things with respect to developing and the value of campus cyber infrastructure plans. And then another person to talk a wee bit about the newest solicitation out of National Science Foundation to help organizations build campus cyber infrastructure and the trust and identity components of that. So our speakers today are Melissa Wu, Senior Vice President for Information Technology and CIO of Stony Brook University, and Tom Barton, who's the Senior Consultant for Cyber Infrastructure or Cybersecurity and Data Privacy at University of Chicago. And he's also engaged here at Internet 2 as a research liaison for trust and identity. So before I get started, I'm just going to do a wee bit of background, because I think the main piece here is not necessarily CI or science in particular, but really collaboration. It's really more about academic collaboration, because while science and classical research areas have this need, so does a much broader area of the academy, not only in scholarship, but also in more of a teaching and learning disciplines. No longer can we be, no person is an island any further. Advancements in all these various disciplines, teaching and learning, have to have some sort of collaboration and working with others, whether that's face-to-face, on campus, across the organization, or offering services to key collaborators around the world. So if you think about this picture of Chicago, as each of these high-rises is really kind of an organization, virtual or not, you'll kind of have a mental picture of people flowing out of one building into the next. And I think there's an ease of doing that. There's an understanding about how you do that, and making it so that there's no barrier there for the individuals that need to go from one building to the next. So really, what are we talking about today? Faculty and students, they want access. They need access to services, collaboration, work, whether it's down the hall or around the world. Services and projects that are funded by organizations like NIH or NSF, or even collaborations offered by the Modern Language Association, need to be able to engage the right individuals to make this happen. And it has to be easier. So one way to do this is really to leverage campus identities. Campus IT departments spend a lot of time making sure these campus identities work for the organization so that they can be leveraged to access financial systems, grades, course management systems, and so forth. They are valuable in and of themselves and can provide valuable information to the services for enhancing the individual's experience with that service. These identities can also be federated, meaning they can be leveraged outside the brick and mortar organization using trust or trust and identity federations like InCommon, of which there are close to 50 that are interfederated today globally. So this is not just a U.S. Infrastructure, which is key in this particular situation. So let's explore how we leverage those for academic collaboration, and what do organizations need to do that for their researchers, faculty, staff, scholars, and students. So I'm going to pass the baton over to Melissa Wu, and she's going to give us a quick update. But before we do that, actually, now that I think about it, I think it would be really tremendous for us to kind of understand who's attending this call. So Dean, can you put out the first poll for us? So we're trying to gauge, and I can't see the entire poll. Can you pull that out there, Dean? I guess folks can use the slider. We're trying to get, thank you, we're trying to get a sense of who's actually on the call so we can target the content appropriately. So it looks like we've got Central IT, some management folks, researchers, excellent, research support. Okay, we'll give a number of, just a couple more seconds on that one.
Interesting, there's no one checking academic department.
Yes, that is interesting, Tom. We have two faculty or academic folks on the call. Yay! Yay! Okay, thanks. Can you throw that one off to the side there and throw number 2? This is really just, again, trying to gauge buzzwords, right, and how much in particular Tom needs to go into the various details about the various terminology that we have. This is really helpful. Oh, a couple of certified folks. Nice. Refeds, research and scholarship category, good. Eduroam, yes.
There's a race between Eduroam and the Basic Identity Federation terminology.
Yeah, I think Eduroam is winning. Good. 28, 29, yeah, this is good. Campus Cyberinfrastructure plans, okay, good. So folks are pretty aware of those and maybe what goes into that. So that's awesome. And good. So maybe Tom, talk a wee bit about Certify, I'd say, looks like, and Refeds, the last couple. Excellent. Okay, thanks folks for giving us some background. That's going to help us in the coming minutes here. And now I will pass the baton over to Melissa.
Thanks so much, Anne. And actually, now that I'm looking at polls, perhaps before I launch into anything about the campus CI plans and in the context of the Campus Cyberinfrastructure NSF solicitation, I was wondering, Dean, if you wouldn't mind subjecting everyone to the third poll, because I'd like to get an idea of what our participants see as being part of the Campus Cyberinfrastructure. You know, now that I look at this poll, I'm wondering if it's just a series of trick questions. But anyway. Oh, interesting. Okay, so we're close to, let's go ahead and wrap, well, 100% on identity and access management, nice. I think it's interesting, not that I want to slant the poll at all, that expertise in consulting is actually lagging behind many of the other items here. Okay, why don't we go ahead and wrap this up? Thank you so much. It gives me a better idea of what everyone thinks is part of the Campus CI plan. So, Personally, I think that independent of whether or not you're applying for this round of the CC Star NSF solicitations, it's pretty clear to me that it's a good idea to have a campus CI plan, if only to have documented where you're going. But since we're talking about the NSF proposal, I'm going to start out with a disclaimer, and that everything I say are just my interpretations of the current solicitation, and I would be very happy if people are willing to correct me on anything or offer alternative interpretations, because I certainly do not work for the NSF and therefore cannot give a definitive interpretation. So with that disclaimer aside, I wanted to just quickly go over what a campus CI plan should include, but really more focus on the elements that have to do with the InCommon Federation shoulds in the solicitation. So perhaps this first piece is rather obvious, but this is the NSF, and so your CI plan does need to demonstrate support for science and engineering, and certainly discovery and innovation and education in it. But it's great to mention humanities, social sciences, but since this is the NSF, it's more likely that those are appropriate for your broader impact section. It's certainly building your campus CI for science can actually help your humanities and social sciences, but in this particular case, you want to focus your main part of the proposal on, and the CI plan, on science and engineering. Clearly, you want to demonstrate that you have a direction and vision and document that positions your campus for future campus cyber infrastructure development. So in other words, that you'll be able to build on what it is that you already have and what you're proposing for this particular project. And as we're always told in IT in any context, at least lately, is that make sure that you are integrated and you're consistent with your institution's plans. So I just want to dig into a couple of technical items that should be included. Note these are shoulds in the solicitation, but when I look at a should, I honestly think that it's going to make you more competitive if you can mention that you are doing these things. So one of them that was also in last year's solicitation and probably solicitations before this was demonstrating IPv6 deployment. And really what they would really love to see is that you have specific scientific applications that are using IPv6. Now, getting to the InCommon pieces, there are two pieces that are listed as shoulds again for InCommon, and one is supporting the research and scholarship entity category. And I'll go into both of these a little bit later. The other one is that you meet the baseline expectations for trust and federation. Something that's nice to have in the campus CI plan is to be able to demonstrate student engagement in the funded activities that you're proposing. And I put a link here to some older examples that ESNet has posted to their website of campus CI plans that were part of successful projects. So I'm going to dig into the InCommon pieces with the understanding that my colleague Tom is the expert and will be actually giving details on these, because I don't even want to pretend as a CIO that I actually know what I'm talking about in technical terms. So the first is something that sort of showed up in last year's solicitation, but it's a little bit different this year. So that is that your campus CI plan should note that you're registered with InCommon as supporting the research and scholarship, the RNS entity category. Now the reason I'm saying it's just a little bit different than last year's solicitation is that now the InCommon RNS entity category and its requirements are a little different, and now we're recommending that you support the REFED's RNS entity category requirements. Now the reason for that is that the legacy RNS attributes are limited to InCommon services only. That doesn't address international research services. Now getting on to the baseline expectations for trust and federation. Now I'm going to be really truthful here and say that I actually checked before starting this webinar and realized that our folks hadn't updated all of their metadata either to meet the baseline expectations for trust in federation. So I think this is where we all are. Sometimes we just haven't gotten around to something. In our case, we did a little bit of reorganization, so there's some things that need to be updated. I noticed there was something that was actually missing in our metadata. That said, I don't expect this to be very difficult for our staff to do. It's just a matter of getting it on their to-do list. But getting back to the baseline expectations, what it is, it's a combination of Federation metadata and operational practice review that ensures that the logins from the IDPs, the identity providers, are trustworthy, and that the SPs, the service providers, are actually, we've ensured that the exchanged attributes are protected and that they're really only used for the intended purpose. And again, Tom can dig into some of the more technical details, but at least from where I sit, that's what it means to me. Okay, so I'm going to go into the what's in it for me, because honestly, even if we weren't applying for the CC Star in this round, I think this is just a good idea to start anyway, is that having the RNS entity category is just one less barrier for your campus researchers. And something we've done at Stony Brook out of the Vice President for Research Office is that we just spent the last year putting together a number of groups to identify barriers to research. And every barrier we can remove for our campus researchers is one less thing that they have to spend their time on, and that much more time they can spend on actually doing their research. And so having RNS in place is just one less thing for them to have to deal with. And so I just think it's a good idea anyway. And from my point of view, in terms of baseline expectations, this addresses, I think, some of the concerns that we were hearing in the InCommon Steering Committee and from others, that there weren't any real teeth around how IDPs were operating and SPs were operating. And the way I look at this is that this helps, I think this gives us a certain level of assurance, and I know that assurance has meaning in trust, and I'm using a different way, but I think it's going to make us feel more comfortable about Federation operations. I think that it's that you setting up your IDP, or if you're running an SP, your SP, in this way that meets the baseline expectations, it'll signal to other entities that you've met this baseline for trust. And so I'm really hoping, just from a CIO point of view and an InCommon Steering Committee member point of view, that this is going to provide more confidence for both IDP and SP operators in terms of the usability and trustworthiness of the InCommon Federation. So at this point, I'm going to hand things off to Tom, since he's the one that has all of the technical details. So Tom, please, all yours.
Well, thanks, Melissa, and I appreciate your transparency about the situation at Stony Brook, and as well yourself as CIO. I have to say that I appreciate the division of labor that it takes to kind of get the job done altogether. It takes all kinds of folks, especially CIOs. So brass tacks. Well, let's get down to a few of them slowly. Before we get to the brass part, though, I kind of want to back up and frame, what we're trying to do in a broad way, and then begin to narrow in on why, kind of have that help understand why we're doing things like with the research and scholarship category and baseline expectations and things like that I'll talk about in a minute. As Ann set up at the beginning, this is all about academic collaboration, and that goes everywhere, down the hall, around the world. So here's a nice little picture of the world lit up by, I think it was someone's recent, what all responds to pings, kind of a survey, and so you can kind of see the results there. It's everywhere. And so our organizations are all over the world that we all collaborate with. The Academy spans the globe and has thousands of member organizations in it, of a variety of sorts. And they all plug into a common infrastructure. I use a singular term, even though we think about it in multiply: network for carrying the data around, and in this case, Federation for allowing user access. So that's not a surprise, but just trying to remember that all between, just pick any pair of dots or set of dots on that map. And we need to enable folks at all those locations, or they're either there or their resources are there, their instruments, their data sets, their computing, what have you. They're spread out all over the place. And we, as Melissa was saying, we need to, it's very valuable to remove from their plates the work of trying to integrate those things and allow the folks to collaborate using across all of those locations and types of resources. So that's what we're trying to do, to help take that off their plate. So it's not just any network or any kind of login technology. It's made specifically for the needs of research and education. We're still the only sector, I think, that has built their own global network. And that's because the commodity internet was unable to meet the needs, in this case really of science, kind of drove that need. And so we had to do our own. And likewise, the cases, the details are a little different, and I'm not going to dwell on it right now. But for managing access the way we do, we're the most collaborative sector by far in all kinds of ways. And the kinds of collaboration facilities that are out there in the cloud and so forth are great and useful to the likes of us, but they don't meet all of our needs. So we have to do this for ourselves, or else we just really hinder accomplishment of that part of the Academy's mission. So it's really critically and strategically important that we do these things and that we're successful at them. So let's kind of start to drill in. We'll focus on the Federation now and think about several tools that are designed. Their whole purpose is to facilitate this kind of academic collaboration. And so I've got a couple of categories, so sort of a three above the line and two below. The three above the line really are just applicable wherever. Baseline expectations that I'll get into in a minute, which is, as Melissa was saying, the basic interoperability and usability standards. And we're rolling it out to all of InCommon. It's not going to be an opt-in thing. It's going to be a property participation within the InCommon Federation. We've begun to talk a lot about it. We've developed a lot of things, but really it's going to be rolled out to participants in a variety of phases over this calendar year, 2018. And so the teeth that Melissa talked about will have grown in towards the latter part of the year. There's the research and scholarship entity category. That is an opt-in program, which I'll also talk about in a minute with some details. And it's really all about, you know, Ann said earlier that the faculty and students want access and attribution. And this is, it meets both, but also the attribution side. They want to associate their name with their work. That's critically important to having an academic career. And it's not surprising that many resource sites out there kind of need those basics just to work properly, so that the user, you know, the academic can do their work properly out there. So the RNS category is a solution, a global solution to how to get those few attributes that are listed here over to those resource sites kind of automatically. Again, don't try not to, I like the Stony Brook framing of trying to take obstacles and inhibitors out of the way of getting the research done. And then certify. That's how I pronounce it and how I write it. But it's oh gosh, security, incident response, trust framework for federated identities. And I know the letters don't add that up. That's just the way it goes. It's still certify. So that's another opt-in program. It has to do with being ready in case a security incident happens out in the Federation. And of course, that's probably just a matter of time. And if probably most people on this call have some connection to a security incident around them, and it's the kind of thing that you want to be ready for before it happens, to manage and mediate the impacts that it might have. And so that's what this is really all about. But it has to happen on a global scale, so it can't happen the way security incident response plans happen more traditionally. And then there's a couple of additional kind of add-ons that where there's more risk that happens, and that's scientific and other academic collaborations often have higher risk. They may be dealing with very sensitive data, very sensitive instruments, the data sets there. People invest a huge amount of time and money and their careers in gathering data. They'd like that to not be tampered with and deleted or that kind of stuff. So there's a multi-factor authentication. standard to kind of add that into your federated service. How to have the login server at a campus and the resource server out there in the federation, decide that we need full multi-factor for this particular user's login. And also a more general assurance program, which talks about the quality of the login credentials. How well are they managed? Melissa said that one of the baseline things was that identity providers should be trusted, and so this kind of, when there's more than just sort of a shallow concern, when there's a deeper concern in terms of a resource site's risk management, there's a way to express that. Okay, let's see here. So I think I'm going to go into, for the balance of my part of this, and please just, if you have questions, put them in the chat or interrupt me somehow. I'll go into each of the first three, and I'm not going to spend time today on the other two, but happy for anyone to ask questions to kind of engage with you on that at some other time. So baseline expectations. What's up with that? Well, we want to have a baseline of trust. We want to make the users, access, happen reliably, not just be sort of a hit or miss or, low value proposition. It should happen with high reliability. And all that's to say, kind of as Anna was pointing out, this is really how InCommon is going to remain strategically valuable to, the academy, to the research and education sector generally. We need this infrastructure to be, at least as valuable as the network is in terms of supporting the activities of our sector that really need us, no one else will support, basically. So, and at a very high level, how? Well, we're going to focus on those things that matter. That Melissa kind of ticked off earlier. You basically want to know if you're relying on someone else's account management at some other organization to log your users into your site with your precious stuff. Okay, there's a basic worry. You're outsourcing a risk management concern or a concern to somebody else, and so even if you don't have a lot on the line, you probably just kind of hope it's basically okay, and you really want to know that when someone logs in, that's the person that's supposed to be logging in, right? That their credential isn't being used by somebody else, and that the person that it's assigned to is supposed to be using that credential. They're not like long gone and just kind of having some residual unauthorized credential access with the credential they were given, and it should have been taken away long ago. And likewise on the service provider or the relying party or the resource provider, those are my terms, by the way, they're all kind of synonyms. The thing you log into, if there's any personal information collected by it in connection with their user's login session or whatever the service is, that you really want to know that, if I'm just an organization, if I'm managing credentials and giving you a few attributes about this user that are personal information, that you're going to, take reasonable care. You're only going to ask for what you need, and you're going to take reasonable steps to prevent any disclosure of that information about my users. And then it has to be really all about the users. We need to help them have things in place so that they know what to do. It's kind of clear and as easy as possible. And then when things go wrong, we should at least have some real breadcrumbs to lead them back to trying to get things right. And so those are kind of the main elements, which I'll talk about a little further in this slide. So baseline expectations, I think, is partly about stating those are things we'd like to be true about InCommon and all of its participants and all of the entities in InCommon, all the login servers and all the resource servers that are out there. But how we do it and the value is really about processes that we're putting into place that never have existed before. And it's the ongoing action of these processes over time that I think are going to produce the real benefits. And so I wanted to kind of tick those off for you. So first of all, Melissa said she was embarrassed to admit to us all publicly that before this talk, she checked and found that there are some Stony Brook metadata, Federation metadata issues compared to baseline expectations requirements of your metadata. And you know what? That's great. Melissa, you're ahead of the game for checking. I do not fault sites everyone is always busy with a million more things than they're really capable, they have time for. And so going out proactively and checking is above what anyone should really expect. So InCommon is going to is building right now automation to bring that information back to the site administrator so that we'll look and report on any gaps you've got in your metadata or that may creep in future as things go on, so that you are able to look at them and know that you should go in and fix something in particular. So we're hoping that with having this process in place, we'll produce a much higher quality of metadata across the entire Federation, just because we're making that feedback loop and bringing it to the right people's attention at the right time. We are asking also that sites do some things that are not really subject to automation and technology review like that. There are some, and I'm not showing them here, there's a small number of 3 or so of high-level statements that are supposed to be true, that are baseline expectations of both the identity provider systems, which are the things people log in with, and service provider systems, which are the things they log into, that basically amount to an eat-your-own-dog food. We will be comfortable enough at a baseline level at trusting each other if you operate these things that we're relying on in a way that's like other stuff that you actually care about, right? So if your login server, is that an actual bona fide kind of first-class login service that your organization uses for itself? Or is it operated like one? That would be good to know. And if it's not, if you only use it for folks outside of your organization, you'd have to wonder, well, geez, should we really trust it if you don't trust it yourself? That kind of a thing. Likewise with securing and protections applied to the operation of a login service or a resource service. You know, if it's collecting some kind of personal information, are you applying the same kind of diligence that you would to other systems that you care about and that are for which you using the same kind of care that for protecting personal information in other systems that you care about at your organization? So it's that kind of a thing. And Melissa, I think you reported that you guys are actually doing that review, looking at yourselves in that light now, and that's fantastic. This is about, so as that show, this is about a site, people at the site doing things and not InCommon doing things to them. Okay? InCommon's not going to make people meet baseline. All the participants of InCommon are going to have to keep themselves up to baseline or beyond baseline. InCommon will help with that, for example, by notifying about gaps about their metadata, but only the site administrators at the sites can do something about it. Likewise, there's other community involvement in baseline. It's very essential. I talked about eat your own dog food and a small number of kind of high-level, sort of ambiguous principles that are supposed to characterize the expectations of all the participants in InCommon. Sometimes you'll do an operational practice review at your site and you will have a question. You're not sure whether or not what you do or propose to do would meet these baseline expectations. So there will be fielded in a couple of months' time a community consensus process where you can air that out, and there'll be a community consensus as the answer finally to the question, as opposed to what I might think or some other person might think. And so there's going to be a formal process there to clarify issues that may be unclear to some as they go through those operational reviews. Likewise, if it should happen that someone using a service or however it may happen that they have a concern, like for example, it may be that someone has tagged, that they do the certify stuff, or they have a research and scholarship. They send those attributes all the time. They claim, they're metadata claims for them when users log in. And yet some relying party, a resource site, might not be seeing those attributes each time users log in from that site. There could be, it may not be in a dispute, seems like a strong term, but what do? Currently, folks have to kind of work that out on their own, however they may, and there will be a process. There is a process being created with baseline expectations to be rolled out in several months, overseen by the community, again, through this assurance board, to resolve those concerns. So there'll be a routine, repeatable, documented, transparent kind of process for arriving at these consensus and clarifications and resolving any concerns that may be aired. And then here's the teeth part. So following rules that have been developed and published, and there's been community consensus around already. There are time frames over which if all else fails, if after we go through all the various cycles proactively to try to help correct and address in some reasonable fashion and reasonable time frame some gap, some way in which the system is not meeting a baseline expectation, if all else fails, then we'll either we'll amend it unilaterally. InCommon steering will direct basically InCommon operations to say, okay, given this program, take it out of the Federation if that's what it takes, or change something about its participation in the Federation so that that gap is no longer evident, is no longer exposed to other parties in the Federation. And then we also have a process when that gap finally gets addressed to reinstate them. So that's, let me kind of stop. Anne wrote a question to all of you out there. I'm curious if anyone wants to bite. How difficult do you think it might be? And for those who haven't seen anything about this until this moment, it might be hard to answer that question. But I think any gut reactions would be still very interesting. You think about reviewing your operations, about how your federated identity provider, federated login service is operated, or how a federated service that you're providing may be operated. If there's any questions about how to think about that, you can start them right now. Okay, so that's baseline. Then there's research and scholarship entity category, and this is the basic usability. So as I think I've already said, that there's these few identifiers that often are needed for academic collaborative services. And so there are hundreds of them. We literally have registered hundreds of them around the world. I listed a few in this gray box on the right, and then just kind of gave up because there's too many to list anymore. There's automation systems you can consult in technical nooks and crannies of the world that kind of keep up with all that, but there are many hundreds of them. And there are many more out there yet to be tagged that need this to work. So this is part of that friction that Stony Brook has committees to try to reduce at Stony Brook that we need to reduce in our federation. It's just friction getting in the way of getting the academic work done. So there is a global process, the Research and Scholarship Entity Category Standard, where all of the different 50-some research and education federations have a responsibility to vet any service provider that requests it. They stand up and say, I am a research and scholarship supporting service. I want to be tagged as such so that corresponding login servers in the Federation around the world will send me these three attributes when they log in, and that life will be good. And so there's a review and a process that's followed by all the federations around the world. And then correspondingly, an identity provider, a login server, federated login server, if it's operated to always send those attributes when requested by a service that is so tagged, okay, there's an automatic little thing you can stick into your login server so that it'll just do that if you put that thing in there, okay? Then you can also put a tag on your login servers metadata to say to the Federation, I do that. Okay, so if you're a service out there and you need these attributes from users logging into you, you know you're going to get them from me. And some of the services out there actually require that before they even let a user try to log in. So if you don't have that tag, you're really putting a bit of a bump, a hard bump in your scholar's way, getting the work done. So that's the research and scholarship category. What it's about. There's some links I have later on that will show you where to go for the details, how to deal with that stuff, where to request if you're a service to get your service tagged this way, and if you're a login server and you want to play, and reduce some friction, what do you do to do that? So those details I won't go into right now, but they're just one click away. And then certify. This is the security incident response stuff of the Federation. It's just really, I was a CISO for 7 years. I stepped back from that role just a few months ago. I have to say that last Thursday I was particularly pleased at being a former CISO when the news about Spectre came out. Anyway, but our role at organizations and higher ed organizations is really or in other organizations is to enable the mission by managing risk to it. But it's about enabling the mission, and we want to be ready to deal with things that come up. And try to minimize the disruptive impact it might have on the mission. In this case, faculty and students getting their work done over the network, over the Federation, so they can continue their work. We want to minimize that. So we should be ready to do so. And it's actually not hard. If you're doing anything like that at all within your campus now, taking the step to basically declare to the Federated, the R&E sector Federated world, that we're ready to collaborate with you guys out there in case that should become necessary, is what Certify is about. And you have to publish in a federated way what your security contact is. What's an email address to get to your security team or to get someone who has a security responsibility, get their attention. There is a standard, and there's a click away at the end of the slides. I'll have a link to. We ask that the Certify program wants you to be ready to collaborate, and so what does that mean more specifically? What assumptions do folks want to be able to make? And there are a few. They're very low bar. They're kind of like those baseline expectations in terms of where they aim. So it's not like you need to have a big security team and expensive tools. Much lower bar than that. It's something that almost every organization probably does for themselves now in some measure. So compare yourselves with that, and if you think that you're there, or or when you think you're there, you can ask your site administrator to set the Certify tag in your metadata, and that's what so folks will know. So you can put security contact information in metadata at any time, Certify or no Certify. That's just a good thing to do. Folks might be able to find, and they can try ad hoc to try to collaborate with you in case they think they need to in connection with managing a security incident. And then you can also say, yeah, and I'm also kind of prepared for this stuff by asserting that tag. And that's something that's tracked worldwide. And there actually are a few research supporting services out in the Federation that require that before they'll let the users try to log in. And that's because, again, they have enough at stake that to them that's a key element of their risk mitigation program on the resource site. So if you have people at your campus that might be needing to collaborate there, they're going to have a hard time, and you've got that tag set. I want to pause briefly for one observation that's not here in the slide any place. I sometimes hear from some kinds of schools that, I'm sitting here at UChicago, big Research One institution. Research is our game and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of places aren't like that, I know. I did some work a couple months ago to get, well, you recall all those R and S sites I put in the gray box, and there were hundreds of them and so forth. I picked 6 of them, just 6, in the U.S. That were more on the science side, and very little in the humanities and social sciences, and did the work to kind of get the user lists from their PIs that were operating them, and they graciously provided me the data, and I collated it and found and tried to map it to who all of these folks are at InCommon member campuses. And it turned out that about 85% of the campuses were accounted for in that way. 85%, and that was just 6 out of hundreds. So it's, I think as a planning assumption, it's fair to assume that all, or nearly all of them, have faculty and students that participate in these things. And so we really need this to extend everywhere, Certify, that is, and all this stuff. So I just wanted to kind of, just roll in that academic collaboration extends across the entire academy, and so we're all R1s. The R1s and everybody else share a common interest in trying to reduce friction and make that as easy as it can be for folks.
So Tom, can I jump in here and ask you?
Oh, yeah.
So I started typing in the actual chat and was having some character problems. So I'm going to ask you kind of an implied question that Melissa posted in the chat room, and that is, in response to my question about how difficult will it be for your organization to support baseline expectations, she mentions about some of the actual expectations that are a bit more vague, and how should organizations in InCommon look for guidance on those things like generally accepted security practices?
Yeah, baseline is really careful to avoid concrete third-party standards, like from the federal government or someplace like that. Like it's because those are often they're really designed for other kinds of environments. We're more of a community, and we're willing to trust each other more when we kind of act like we're willing to be responsible for that. So that's where the generally accepted kind of terminology comes from. I think the way my first suggestion is to treat it the same as everything else like it that you treat. So, for example, what kind of security practices pertain to other kind of important systems? Melissa, at Stony Brook, for example, you have this is one authentication service. You could look at this, the Federated login server is, and you've got others, or they're connected. They're part of the same thing. You probably care a lot about how your logins work within Stony Brook. And so really, I think that folks will be quite happy if they know that you do the same for this login service at Stony Brook as you do for others. That would be my suggestion. I think that'd be a good guide stick or guidepost or something, a guideline. So the Eat Your Own Dog Food guideline. I don't know whether or not we're going to have to come up with external lists, NIST 800-this, that, or the other, or things like that have to help us. But I don't know that they're necessary. We'll see. But I think that's what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tom, if I could chime in a bit. I mean, and thank you for that advice. I mean, as it is, we're having to certify, well, not certify, but we're having to look at protection of FERPA protect data, for example, PCI DSS. So, I mean, I'm not worried that we can make a statement that we are meeting generally accepted security practices, but it is interesting that this is so vague.
Yeah, we had tried the other way earlier. Some folks will recall InCommon's bronze and silver assurance programs, which really were derivative from federal government's similar programs and National Institute of Standards and Technology standards and so forth. And those are just so onerous for the context. I mean, if you want to do that with the federal government now, you have to go through FedRAMP and then other stuff on top of that, if you want to interact with them. It's just so outside of what we need for what we need to do to support science and scholarship and other academic collaboration. So, but those are the things where it's kind of crystal clear and written down with, quite succinct, well, quite clearly and lengthily, at length. But I guess we're hoping that we can get this done in sort of an academic way rather than the federal government way. And so that's why I think that's why I really want, I'm really keenly interested in the community coming to consensus on these things rather than some expert coming up with an authoritative specification document as the answer to that question. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, and I see your point, because a couple of campuses ago we were looking at bronze assurance, and yeah, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. So I want people like you, as well as and others, when we have a question that's going to come up, particularly one of the first ones, what does this generally accepted security practices mean? For us to have, a good community discussion with all the different kinds of voices in the community that need to be heard around that, to have their say, and we'll net out what we think we mean for ourselves, at least for the time being. So, Tone, you have something here. Some sort of checklist. Admins can go over, bam, 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 and done. Ton, if you can imagine what goes on that checklist, would you please send it to me? Seriously. I actually am quite serious. If we can make it that concrete, that would be fantastic. It would be very enabling. So, Ton, I was also kind of curious that the certify statements, when you have a chance, maybe not right now, of course, in the next few minutes, but you'll see there's about, 7 or 8 statements. They're not quite as ambiguous as a few of the baseline expectation statements, but they certainly are flexible, let's say, and tend to be refer to what an organization already does for itself rather than impose some external obligation on the organization. I'd say both baseline and certify kind of have that property. And I'm just curious if you find the same things you really prefer bam, 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 and done for certify, or if you think that is a checklist that's more tight I'm just kind of curious for your feedback about that, if you would feel like giving it to me. Okay. I'm sorry. So, Anne, you have a question you've written here. You've had enough background. Tell me the steps to take support collaboration.
Yeah, so this is in response to Tom's question. And so I'm just taking a look at our recently developed collaboration page and whether that's enough. And I'm not sure it is, given the what he's suggesting. And that's why I'm kind of verifying. Is it, I've heard all the background, just tell me the things I need to do as a site admin. I think we could do that. Or is it more about materials and how to talk to others about it? But it sounds like, Ton, you're talking about from a site admin point of view, how do I flip the certify bit and so forth?
Yeah, and Ton, thanks for being a good sport and trying to suggest it a bit. Yeah. And Scott, I see Scott Krant is noting that indeed some of the baseline expectations are concrete, and indeed they are. There's the one that talks about metadata being accurate and complete, stuff like that, and that's where we really can get kind of one of those feedback processes, to kind of an algorithm can compute the difference between what a piece of metadata expresses and what it should express according to that baseline expectation, and that has been specified quite concretely, and it's all referenceable. Hang on, I should probably go to that slide here. So one of these links here, the top one, you'll find all kinds of details about those processes and some of the reference documents and so forth, as well as a roadmap at that first link. But I would say that I guess I'm gonna stick with there's the concrete things that Scott is talking about, and there's details about them. There's one concrete thing in particular that will probably need some discussion within the community to arrive at some consensus about, which has to do with privacy policy URLs. I'm not going to get into that right now, but it's an interesting one, and there may be some discussion around logos that are also required by baseline to be there. That's a real, the logo especially is a very usability, user experience. It's a very important contribution to positive user experience, and we have a kind of a really spotty implementation of it across InCommon and other federations too. So there may be some discussions about those. We'll have, and I think the generally accepted security practices will also engender some other discussions. But I realize, as I say, I'm hoping that we can arrive at a consensus and possibly revise our consensus from time to time as we see fit to, rather than have that expert reference tell us what to do. So let's see here. We have a couple more. Melissa had agreed with Scott.
Well, and Jim suggests a particular site to basically point your IDP at to see if you address these requirements. Some of that's going to be, Jim, some of it's going to be supported in the health checks. But you're kind of, what I'm kind of getting at, what I'm kind of reading is not just a test, sort of a test site, but more of a, if I'm supporting academic collaboration, where do I fall short? Where do I need help? It's not just baseline on that one, which makes sense.
It does.
Yep.
And I think maybe we'll have the technical bits put together. Maybe it won't be, it might cut the work down to size to make that happen along the way.
Yep.
Cool.
So I guess I have a question. If you're, I know you're almost at the end of your slides. We have like 6 minutes left, Tom.
Uh-huh.
So
I'm at the end of my slides, so yeah, take it away, Ann.
Okay, I just have a question for Melissa. So this webinar, as you probably all have figured out, the timing of it is really being driven by that NSF Campus Cyber Infrastructure solicitation, the CC Star solicitation that the NSF pushed out last year, and these updated requirements in the CI plans for InCommon participation along with baseline expectations and research scholarship support. So it's really what's kind of driving this. And we also threw in, Tom also threw in certify, because that also is really important in this context, in the research context. And while this is being driven by this NSF due date, we really wanted to make this a broader, more collaboration webinar to kind of say, yeah, NSF is driving this, but this is useful for way more than just the science disciplines. And I wanted to give Melissa some time to talk about collaboration at Stony Brook and how these types of things, how this types of infrastructure benefit the other disciplines and teaching and learning.
Oh, thanks. And well, certainly in terms of teaching and learning versus research, I don't think there's a versus anymore. At least in our context, there's a lot of teaching and learning to be had that are integrated with research because we have such a strong program in providing research opportunities for undergraduates. But that said, having things in place such as your SAML logins and whatnot that serve the CI certainly are serving our learning management system and other learning tools that we're offering to campus. So they're in many ways inseparable. What's good for campus CI and research is good for teaching and learning. And I was focusing mostly on science and engineering because this is in the context of the NSF proposal. But the other thing to think about is that it also helps humanities and social sciences. And having these things in place certainly will facilitate, say, connections for MLA-type services. In our case, we're working on a LOLA pilot, which helps benefit our music department, and I think it's going to be really cool. I mean, for those who don't know what LOLA is, it's a way to reduce latency across the network so that you could have musicians in different parts of the country play together. And it reduces latency enough so hopefully they can actually really truly play together in a way that timing actually works. So what we're putting in place to support science and engineering is going to help our humanities and social sciences and help teaching and learning as well.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think we get questions from organizations that say, we don't do research on our campus, we don't need this. And it's a collaboration infrastructure, and we do way more than just classic science, basic science and broader science research leveraging collaboration. That's what our academia is actually all about. It's all about working with each other to solve and come up with interesting solutions to existing problems. So it's much broader than that.
Yeah, research isn't just the R1s anymore. Even though I'm speaking as someone at an R1 institution right now, I have plenty of colleagues that are at liberal arts institutions that have told me in order to retain their faculty, they are having to support research because their faculty are going to walk to another institution that will support their scholarly activities and research. So it is not just an R1 university issue anymore.
Yeah, I agree. So I'll just close this out here. Unless, Tom, do you have any kind of final thoughts, or maybe I should say parting shots that you want to make?
Oh, come on now. I'll leave yours be the last parting shot, Anne, of this particular webinar. No, with only 1 minute left, I don't think I can get a parting thought in that limited time. Why don't you close us out?
Okay. So if you have questions, just put the slide up with our email addresses. We have put a little alias in there about CI plan help. If you have questions and are developing a CI plan for the NSF CC STAR proposal or solicitation and are interested to kind of know a little bit more about InCommon, how that can help, maybe brainstorm a bit about what you might put in there, send a note to the alias and we'll see what we can do. See if we can either help directly or dig up a partner across the community that can help you do that. So let us know. And I just wanted to let you know, also there's a synergistic upcoming webinar that Jim Basney and Scott Crandon will be doing at the end of this, or middle of this month, on CI Logon 2.0. And for those of you unaware, CI Logon 2.0 is really authentication and, well, really identity and access management for research, and is looking to bridge the gap between researchers that don't have access to federated credentials and those that need a little bit more consistency and how they interact with their virtual organizations and their projects and so forth. So I wouldn't miss that one. If you're interested in the research space, it should be really interesting and is a very valuable NSF-funded infrastructure. We also will be talking more about InCommon baseline expectations. In this Wednesday, January 24th session will be the first in a series of 3 that talks about what baseline is, what it means to you. The health checks will be in the second one. And then the third, baseline expectations, will be focused really on upper-level management policy issues and what you need to think about with respect to this and your InCommon participation going forward. So with that, thanks very much for joining, and I'll bounce you folks back to Dean for closing us out.
Okay, thank you, Ann, and thanks to Tom and Melissa. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, folks.
Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.